There is a place at the very end of the United States where the road simply stops. Not because the engineers ran out of ambition, or the funding ran out, or the terrain became too difficult, but because there is nothing beyond it. The next significant landmass to the south is Cuba, 145 kilometers across the Straits of Florida. To the west is the Gulf of Mexico. To the east is the Atlantic Ocean. Key West is the last island in a chain of islands that extends southwest from the Florida mainland like a string of beads dropped into the sea, in a feat of engineering that still, after a century of existence, seems slightly improbable. Mile marker 0, the southernmost point in the continental United States. The end of US Route 1, which begins at the Canadian border in Maine and terminates here at the bottom of the country. A center of the cigar industry, a hub of sponge harvesting, a naval base, a haven for writers and artists and people who needed to disappear, a destination for the kind of tourism that values atmosphere over amenity, and one of the most distinctive communities in the American South. Which is itself saying something, given how distinctive the American South already is. Key West is not a typical American place. It has never been. The Keys extend southwest from the Florida mainland for approximately 240 kilometers, a chain of coral islands formed not from volcanic activity or glacial deposition, but from the accumulated remains of ancient coral reefs, exposed by changes in sea level over millions of years. Independent, eccentric. Tolerant in ways that the surrounding region has historically not been, fiercely attached to its own identity. From above, the island is smaller than you expect, 4 miles long and 2 miles wide at its widest point. An area of roughly 11 square kilometers, much of it occupied by buildings and streets and the naval facilities that have been present since the early 19th century. The water surrounds it in every direction, the Atlantic to the south and east, the Gulf to the north and west, in colors that range from the deep indigo of open ocean to the transparent turquoise of the shallow flats, where the seagrass grows and the bonefish move in water so clear they are visible from above. The streets of the island from above reveal a grid that was laid out in the 19th century and has not fundamentally changed since. Narrow streets lined with the wooden houses that the island's building tradition produced, their wide porches and their metal roofs, and their particular relationship with the sea breeze reflecting a vernacular architecture of considerable intelligence and considerable charm. And at the western end of the island, as the sun descends toward the Gulf, something happens every evening that encapsulates something essential about this place. People gather, not because anyone organized them to, not because a schedule said to, but because the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico from the western tip of Key West is, on its best evenings, one of the most beautiful things that happens in the continental United States on a daily basis. And the people who live here and the people who visit here have, for generations, understood that watching it together is better than watching it alone. The geography of the end. To understand Key West is to first understand the Florida Keys, the archipelago that connects it tenuously to the rest of the country. Key West is the last island in a chain of islands that extends southwest from the Florida mainland like a string of beads dropped into the sea. The rock beneath the Keys is limestone, oolite in the upper Keys, Key Largo limestone in the middle, Miami limestone in the lower. Mandirayuponchi. The rock beneath the Keys is limestone, oolite in the upper Keys, Key Largo limestone in the middle, Miami limestone in the lower. Soft and porous and close to the surface everywhere, which is why basements do not exist in the Keys, and why the relationship between the islands and the water table is intimate and complicated. The Overseas Highway, the road that connects the Keys to the mainland and the Keys to each other, is one of the more remarkable pieces of American infrastructure. It follows the route of the Florida East Coast Railway, which Henry Flagler built through the Keys between 1905 and 1912 in an act of engineering ambition. That was considered at the time either visionary or insane, and turned out to be both. By the time you reach Key West, something has shifted. The mainland is far away in a sense that mere distance does not fully capture. You have arrived somewhere that exists on its own terms, including many of the World War I veterans who were working on the Keys as a Depression-era relief project. The railway was never rebuilt. Its roadbed became the foundation of the highway that replaced it. Driving the Overseas Highway from the mainland to Key West is an experience that prepares you gradually for the psychological reality of Key West. The islands grow smaller, the water on both sides grows closer, the bridges grow longer. The 7-mile bridge, the longest of them, crosses the open water between Marathon and the Lower Keys in a span that seems, when you are in the middle of it, to have no beginning and no end. By the time you reach Key West, something has shifted. The mainland is far away in a sense that mere distance does not fully capture. You have arrived somewhere that exists on its own terms. The Conch Republic. Key West has, throughout its history, maintained a complicated and somewhat theatrical relationship with its own sovereignty. In 1982, the United States Border Patrol established a roadblock on U.S. Route 1 at the point where the Keys meet the mainland, stopping every vehicle and checking for illegal immigrants and drugs. It follows the route of the Florida East Coast Railway, which Henry Flagler built through the Keys between 1905 and 1912 in an act of engineering ambition. Produced outrage in Key West that escalated, as things in Key West have a tendency to do, into something more dramatic than a simple protest. The mayor of Key West, Dennis Wardlow, declared that Key West was seceding from the United States to form the Conch Republic, immediately declared war on the United States, surrendered after 1 minute, and applied for $1 billion in foreign aid for the damage suffered by the Keys from the United States blockade. The Border Patrol roadblock was subsequently removed. The Conch Republic, its motto, "We seceded where others failed," its flag a conch shell on a field of blue, is not a real political entity, but it is a real cultural one. The Conch Republic, its motto, "We seceded where others failed," its flag a conch shell on a field of blue, is not a real political entity, but it is a real cultural one. The Conch Republic commemorates its independence with an annual celebration that is one of the stranger civic holidays in the United States. Its passport, while not accepted by any nation, is treated with a kind of affectionate respect by Key West institutions. And the spirit it embodies, the conviction that Key West is different from the rest of the country, that its values and its culture and its way of organizing life are its own and are worth defending with whatever tools are available, including absurdist performance, is entirely genuine. The Overseas Highway, the road that connects the Keys to the mainland and the Keys to each other, is one of the more remarkable pieces of American infrastructure. The isolation of the island produced over generations a community that was self-sufficient by necessity and independent by temperament, that looked at the mainland with a mixture of affection and distance that is characteristic of island communities everywhere. The Old Town and its architecture. Key West's Old Town is one of the best preserved collections of 19th century wooden architecture in the United States. And it is that architecture, the particular character of the buildings that line the island's streets, that gives Key West its distinctive visual identity. And it is that architecture, the particular character of the buildings that line the island's streets, that gives Key West its distinctive visual identity. The houses of Key West were built by people who understood the climate they were building for. Wide porches on all sides, called verandas or piazzas in the local terminology, provide shade and catch the sea breeze. The roofs are pitched steeply to shed the heavy rain of the tropics. The windows are tall and narrow, positioned to maximize cross-ventilation. The houses are raised on foundations of coral limestone, elevating the living space above the ground moisture and providing storage space below. The architectural style that developed in Key West in the 19th century is a hybrid, part Bahamian, part New England, part Caribbean, adapted from the building practices of the broader island world that Key West was part of. The result is something specific to this place, graceful, practical, and immediately recognizable as belonging to Key West in the way that a building belonging to a particular culture always announces itself. The bougainvillea that climbs their fences and drapes over their gates adds to the color, magenta and orange and deep purple, in a way that is simultaneously tropical and somehow specific to the particular quality of Key West's light. Key West's relationship with the water is not recreational, it is existential. The island exists because of the sea, was sustained for most of its history by the sea, and continues to be defined by the sea in ways that go deeper than the tourism industry's use of its beaches and its sunsets as marketing images. The wrecking industry, the salvage of ships that ran aground on the reef, was the foundation of Key West's 19th century prosperity. The Florida Reef, running parallel to the Keys, was one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Western Hemisphere for sailing vessels navigating between the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. Ships ran aground with regularity, and the law of the sea gave the first vessel to reach a wreck the right to claim the cargo for salvage. The wreckers of Key West, operating under a system licensed by the federal government, with a judge in Key West adjudicating the value of salvaged cargo, made fortunes that built the finest houses on the island, and supported an economy that made Key West briefly the wealthiest city per capita in the United States. When the wrecking industry declined, as lighthouses were built on the reef and navigation improved, Key West found other relationships with the sea. Sponge harvesting, cigar manufacturing, which used Cuban leaf tobacco processed by Cuban cigar makers who came to Key West in large numbers in the late 19th century. Cigar manufacturing, which used Cuban leaf tobacco processed by Cuban cigar makers who came to Key West in large numbers in the late 19th century. Fishing, both commercial and eventually sport. The shrimping industry that developed in the 20th century and that has declined in recent decades. As the stocks of Gulf shrimp have been affected by environmental pressure and competition from farmed shrimp, the waters around Key West are among the most ecologically significant in the continental United States. The Florida Reef, the only living coral reef in the continental United States, part of the third largest coral reef system in the world, runs parallel to the Keys from Biscayne National Park to the Dry Tortugas, and its health is directly connected to the health of the marine ecosystem that Key West depends on. The reef is under severe stress from warming ocean temperatures, from ocean acidification, from the runoff of nutrients from the mainland that promotes algae growth, from the physical damage of anchors and snorkeling fins and boat groundings. The coral bleaching events that have struck the Florida Reef in recent decades have been among the most severe in the reef's recorded history, and the long-term prognosis for reef health in a warming ocean is a matter of genuine scientific concern that the Keys community is actively engaged with. The backcountry, the shallow flats of Florida Bay that extend north and west of Key West, is one of the premier fishing environments in North America. The bonefish, permit, and tarpon that move through the clear, shallow water of the flats are the targets of a fly fishing culture that has developed around Key West since the mid-20th century, and that attracts anglers from across the country and the world. The guides who navigate these waters, poling their shallow draft skiffs across flats that are sometimes no more than a foot deep, reading the water for the signs of fish, possess a knowledge of the local marine environment that is specific, deep, and acquired only through years of daily presence. The culture of the end of the road. Key West has always attracted people who were looking for something they could not find elsewhere. Tennessee Williams lived here on and off for more than 3 decades, finding in Key West's tolerance for difference, and its distance from the mainland something that the south of his birth could not provide. His house on Duncan Street, a modest wooden structure by Key West standards, was where he wrote some of his most significant work, including The Rose Tattoo, which is set in a community whose characters are clearly informed by the Cuban and Italian communities of Key West. John James Audubon visited Key West in 1832, documenting the bird life of the Keys and the surrounding waters, in paintings that remain among the finest natural history illustrations ever made. The Audubon House in Key West, preserved as a museum, contains a collection of his work and stands as evidence of the island's long history of attracting artists who found in its light and its wildlife and its distance from ordinary life something that their work required. The literary and artistic tradition that Key West has sustained is not merely historical. The Key West Literary Seminar, founded in 1983, brings writers of international significance to the island each year for a conference that has become one of the most important literary events in the United States. The visual arts community that has developed in Key West, galleries, studios, the annual art fairs that bring collectors and artists together, on Bees DC in Hall, reflects the ongoing attraction of the island's light and atmosphere for people who make things. The gay community of Key West has been a central part of its cultural character for decades. Key West's tolerance, its long tradition of accepting people who did not fit elsewhere, made it an early haven for gay men and lesbians' village than of a city. At a time when such communities had very few geographical options in the American South, the population of gay residents that developed in Key West through the 1970s and 1980s was devastated by the AIDS epidemic, which struck the island with particular severity. The community that rebuilt itself in the aftermath is one of the most visible and most economically significant in Key West. And the annual Fantasy Fest, a 10-day costume and art celebration in October that is one of the largest festivals in Florida, reflects the particular character of a community that has always valued self-expression over convention. The Mallory Square Sunset Celebration, the nightly gathering at the western tip of the island to watch the sun descend into the Gulf, is one of those institutions that is simultaneously a tourist attraction and a genuine community ritual. The performers who set up along the waterfront, the fire eaters, the acrobats, the musicians, the man who performs with trained cats, have been part of the sunset tradition for decades, earning their living from the crowd that gathers each evening. The ritual of gathering to watch the sunset together, of applauding when the sun disappears below the horizon, is not, for Key West residents, a tourist activity. It is simply what you do, what has been done here for as long as anyone can remember. The economy at the end of the road. Key West's economy is built almost entirely on tourism, and the concentration of economic dependence on a single industry in a place of such geographic constraint produces dynamics that are both economically rational and socially complicated. The approximately 4 million visitors who come to Key West each year, by car, by cruise ship, by the small airlines that connect the island to Miami and Fort Lauderdale, generate the revenue that sustains the hotels and the restaurants and the bars and the shops and the tour operators and the fishing guides and the water sports businesses that are the primary employers on the island. The cruise ships, in particular, which can bring several thousand passengers to the island in a single day, a number that in the worst cases approaches or exceeds the resident population, have been a source of ongoing debate about the appropriate scale of tourism and its impact on the quality of life of residents and the character of the community they have built. In 2021, Key West residents voted to limit the size of cruise ships that could dock at the island, a referendum result that reflected years of frustration with the impact of mass cruise tourism on the streets and the environment and the atmosphere of a place that its residents value precisely because it is not like everywhere else. The legal and political battles that followed, involving the cruise industry, the state government, and the federal government, illustrated the difficulty of a community attempting to control its own destiny. The fishing industry, both commercial and recreational, remains significant in Key West, though its scale has diminished from the height of the shrimping era. The charter fishing fleet that operates out of the historic seaport is one of the most active in Florida, and the fishing guides of the backcountry represent a professional community of considerable skill and economic significance. The real estate market of Key West is one of the most expensive in Florida, which is itself one of the more expensive states for real estate. The combination of geographic constraint, the island is finite and cannot grow, high demand from both buyers and vacation rental investors, and the general increase in Florida property values has produced home prices that are accessible only to buyers of considerable means or to people whose families have held property on the island for long enough. The workforce housing crisis, the difficulty of housing the people who work in Key West's service economy within reasonable distance of the island, is one of the most serious challenges facing the community. The environmental reality of Key West. Key West is one of the American places most immediately and most visibly threatened by climate change. The island sits at an average elevation of approximately 1.8 meters above sea level. In some areas, the elevation is lower. The combination of sea level rise, which is occurring faster in South Florida than in most coastal areas of the United States due to the particular characteristics of regional ocean circulation, and the increasing intensity of Atlantic hurricanes produced by warming ocean temperatures represents an existential threat to Key West in a time frame that is not geological but human. Within the lifetimes of children currently living on the island, the combination of higher seas and more powerful storms will pendence and the wildness that Key West has always valued. Some find them a nuisance. The crowing at 3 a.m., the damage to gardens, the mess. The city has, at various points, attempted to manage the chicken population through trapping and relocation programs that have met with limited success, partly because the chickens are numerous and partly because a significant portion of the Key West population considers the chickens to be part of the island's character and objects to their removal. The chickens are, in this sense, a perfect Key West story. A situation that would be managed efficiently elsewhere, that is managed here through a combination of half-hearted official action and community ambivalence, that has persisted because the place is too independent and too fond of its own eccentricities to do the sensible thing, and that has become, in the process, one of the things that makes Key West specifically and irreplaceably itself. So why do people stay at the end of the road, in a place that floods regularly and faces an uncertain future and costs more than most of its residents can comfortably afford, and is genuinely small in a way that can feel, in certain moods, like confinement? They stay because the water is right outside the door, not as scenery, as the organizing fact of daily life. The ability to be in the water, in the ocean, in the Gulf, on the flats, with a frequency and a casualness that nowhere else in the continental United States permits. The morning kayak through the mangroves before work. The afternoon swim off the dock. The evening on the water in a skiff, watching the light change over the backcountry. These are not special occasions in Key West. They are the texture of Tuesday. They stay because the community is real in a way that larger places struggle to achieve. 25,000 people on a 4x2 mile island produce a social density, a frequency of encounter with the same people, a network of mutual recognition and mutual knowledge that is more characteristic of a village than of a city. The bartender at the local bar knows your name. The woman at the hardware store knows your house. The fishing guide you hired 5 years ago waves from his skiff when you pass on the water. This is not a performance of community. It is what community actually feels like when geography enforces it. They stay because Key West has always been a place where people could be what they are. The tolerance that the island developed over generations, partly from the diversity of its population, partly from its distance from the mainland and its authorities, partly from the practical reality that in a small community you cannot afford to be at war with your neighbors over their differences, produced a culture of genuine acceptance that remains real even as the island has become more expensive and more gentrified. The gay man who moved to Key West in 1985 because it was one of the few places in the South where he could live openly. The artist who moved here because the light was right and the rent was low. The former corporate lawyer who walked away from a career in Chicago because the sunset over the Gulf was more real than anything he had left behind. These stories, repeated in thousands of variations, are the actual history of Key West. They stay because of the sunset, not as a cliche, the sunset as marketing image, the sunset as screensaver, the sunset as the thing that appears on postcards, but as the daily reality of a sky above a body of water that does things with light that are not available in landlocked places, that change with the weather and the season and the presence or absence of clouds in ways that make each one specific, particular, unrepeatable. They stay because once you have lived at the end of the road, in the last place before the ocean takes over, with the knowledge that there is nothing between you and whatever comes next except open water, the mainland feels very far away in a sense that has nothing to do with the actual distance. And most of the time, that feels exactly right. This is Key West, and this is why people stay.